Today we'll jump into chapter 11 and we're going to talk about reading and writing to files and random numbers. So these are the sections that we will be covering from the book. Now in real life, you don't usually have a person sitting in front of the computer entering all the data. You know, if it's a few pieces of data, you can do that. But imagine that I want to write a program that's going to calculate the final grade of all my students. Now, in a class that has 24 students and every student has, let's say, 30 assignments that they did and exam grades, I can't be sitting there having the computer say, what are the grades for the first person? And I sit there and enter 30 grades. And then the program says, what are the grades for the second person? And I sit there and enter the grades for the next student. That's not going to work. In real life, when you have a lot of data, you want to interact with files. You want to be able to read from files and you want to be able to write out to files. So the two types of files that we are going to be using are the ones that we're reading from. Those are called input files. They are files that the program reads data from. Now those files, someone has to create them before the program starts running. And the output files are the files that the program is going to write data to. So for example, I can have an input file that has the grades of all my students. And then the output file maybe would be the name of the student, next to them their letter grade. Now in this course, we're going to only be working with text files. So those files that we're going to be creating, I'm going to use Notepad to create them and read them. You can't use Microsoft Word, they cannot be PDF. So they have to be plain text. Now, if we're going to write to a file, there are several ways. The way that we're going to learn how to do it is one of the simplest ways, and we're going to use a class called PrintWriter. Now, in the textbook, you will find that there are other ways to do it. They are more complicated or they have been obsolete. So I want you to always use PrintWriter for writing. I don't want you to use any other method for this class except PrintWriter. And to use PrintWriter, we have to import a statement. Just like for Scanner, we had to import java.util.scanner. PrintWriter exists in a package called java.io. IO stands for input output. Now, because we are going to be using several classes in java.io, what we can do is just say import java.io.asterisk. And this asterisk will act as a wildcard and it will import all the classes that are inside IO, including PrintWriter. So that is the first thing we need to do. Go ahead and import that line. So we're going to go to our project. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import java.io.asterisk. Okay, and that's going to include PrintWriter. That's the first thing. Now, how do I use PrintWriter? The nice thing about PrintWriter is that it has very similar methods to system.out. So with system.out, we learned system.out.print, system.out.println, system.out.printf. PrintWriter also has print, println, and printf. And so what we used to do with system.out, we can do with the PrintWriter. Now, how do we create a PrintWriter? What we do is do a line that's similar to Scanner. When we wanted to create a scanner, what we did was say scanner, keyboard equal new, scanner, and in parentheses, system.in. Scanner was the name of our class, and that's why we had scanner, something equal new scanner. So the name of the class appears on the right side and the left side. In parentheses, we told Scanner where we wanted it to read from. We wanted it to read from system.in, that window in NetBeans at the bottom. To create a PrintWriter, we use similar logic, a similar command. We want to create here a PrintWriter. So we say PrintWriter, and then you can choose any variable name equal new PrintWriter. And in parentheses, you're going to tell this PrintWriter where to write to. So you're going to tell it the name of the file that you want it to write to. So that's the first thing we do. And then we start writing. So we start using our print or println or printf commands to write to this output file, this PrintWriter object. So now instead of writing to system.out, that window at the bottom in NetBeans, we are writing to our PrintWriter, which is referring to this file. Now, when you're done writing, you need to close the file, because if you don't close the file, what will happen is the file will not get saved. You will have an empty file. Okay, so let's try these commands ourselves to see what's going to happen. So the first thing we're going to do, number one, is create a PrintWriter. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say PrintWriter. And I like calling my PrintWriters PW, equal new PrintWriter. And let's just say here Java 1. I'm going to name my file. And what I always do is I always close the file immediately. So immediately I'm going to come and I'm going to say pw.close. And now I'm ready to write to the file. So I'm going to use the same methods, but instead of system.out, I'm using my PrintWriter, pw.println 1, 2, 3, pw.println cats, dogs, and you can write whatever you want to it. You can even write variables. So if I have int count equal to 10, I can say pw.println count. Okay, so you can write anything that you want to it. And now I'm going to execute this code and I'm going to show you where this file gets created. Okay, there's one more thing that's missing that I didn't tell you. It's going to show up in one of the slides later, but I'm just going to show you now. We have to add throws IO exception. And the reason we have to add this is because here, when you're asking the PrintWriter, this file, I'm asking the computer program to go create it. If the file exists, it's gonna erase it. So if the file exists, the program will erase it, erase its contents, and start writing from the beginning, okay? So if this is a file that already exists, the program will just erase it and start kind of overwriting it. If the file does not exist, the program will create it. So if this file doesn't exist, it'll create it. If the program cannot create the file, it throws an exception. And I will show you what that exception looks like in a little bit. But for now, what we want to do is we're going to say throws IO exception, meaning that if anything happens, this code will throw an IO exception. So let's run this code. And since I don't have any system.out.println lines, nothing is getting printed here. Now I need to go find that Java 1.txt file. So the place it gets saved is where you have saved your project. So I saved my projects on the desktop in a folder called Java 1 projects. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to find the chapter 11_1 project because that's the name of my project. I will go there and immediately I find Java 1.txt. I am recording this at 8:41 p.m. and this file just got created a minute ago. So now if I look into the file, I will find the 3 lines that I wrote. I wrote 1, 2, 3, cats and dogs, and I wrote the number 10. Now let's make a small change to this file. I'm just going to say cats and nothing else. And let's here change count to 78. Okay. And let's run this code again. And it ran successfully. So now when I go and I open the file, I find that the contents have changed. So what happened? The program erased the contents of the old file, the one that had cats and dogs and 10, and it created the file again with new contents. So if the file exists, it will erase the contents and write again. When the file doesn't exist, I delete this file. It's gone. And I run this program again. What it's going to do is going to create the file. So the file just got created. So if the file doesn't exist, it creates it. If it exists, it overwrites the contents of the file. Now, what if I tell it to write to a place that doesn't exist? Let's say I want you to write to C desktop, I don't know, some stuff, java.text. Let's run that. And it throws an exception. Here, let me show you how this exception is, how you can read it. So here, the first line at the bottom shows me that this is coming from my file, chapter 11.1.java line 23, which is the main method. And I click on it and it's telling me this is the line that's causing the exception. So when it tried creating that PrintWriter, so here it tried creating a PrintWriter, and that PrintWriter tried to do with some other stuff. Eventually it came to the place where it actually went to try to create this file in my operating system. And here it's giving me the exception, file not found exception. See desktop, blah, 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 all that. The system cannot find the path specified. It could not find this folder to create the file in. Now, can I give it a valid folder? Can I actually go to the desktop and create a file there? Of course you can. So what you can do is you need to know how to get to the desktop. So to get to the desktop, I have to minimize a lot of things, and I'll show you in a second. The easiest way to get to the desktop is to have a file that's already on the desktop and right-click on it and find where that is. If you don't have one, what you can do is you can right-click, and let's say I'm going to create a new file, new text document, and that's the text document that you want to do, and I'm just going to say Java. Okay. Now here, this file, how do I know how to get to this desktop? If you right-click on the file, and then when it opens, you go to Properties, it's going to show you where the file is created. So the location is C users, my user account, and then desktop. So this is where the file is. So if I was to copy this and go back to my NetBeans and put that there, and you see that it's adding it as double slashes, because remember that slash is used as an escape sequence. So we have to put one as two, so that doesn't think like /n is new line and /tab, t is tab. So we have to put two of them. So here I'm telling it I want you to go to C users, I'm a foo's desktop Java 1 and create me the file there. So let's run it and see if the file is going to get created on our desktop. Anyway, if I go there on the desktop, let's see, let's search for it. Where did it go? There it is, java1.text, and it added the content. Okay, again, if I go to my NetBeans and change what it says, let's say this is 100, and run it again, I will find that the file contents have changed. So it's creating this file and it's modifying it every time I call the PrintWriter. So on Windows, you need to, if you want to save to a specific location like your flash drive or your desktop or a specific folder, you need to put the full path. Make sure you use 2 backslashes instead of 1. Now, if you're on a Mac or Unix, it's a / instead. So this is an example of one that's running on Mac. Now, if you don't put anything, you just put the name of the file, like I showed you. What it does, it goes to your project folder, and immediately you will find it there inside the project folder immediately. And then we also talked about file and exceptions, in that if anything happens, if the JVM is not able to create that file in that location because the path doesn't exist, or maybe you're asking it to write to a place that's read-only, or you're asking it to write to a place that doesn't have enough memory, doesn't have enough space, like your flash drive ran out of space. Any reason, so if any exception happens and it cannot write to that file or create that file because the folder is read-only, for any reason, the program cannot create the file, it will throw an exception. Now, we will not learn in this course how to handle exceptions. All we learn how to do is just that when an exception happens, we throw it back at the user. And that's why you saw that red exception in NetBeans, the window at the bottom. What it was doing, it was throwing the exception at us and saying, you, the user, figure it out. Figure out what the exception was. Okay, so what we do is we come next to main and we add those two words, throws IO exception. The I, the O, and the E are all uppercase. It matters. Okay, and so here, if I try to write to the G drive, and the G drive, like say I don't have any flash drive on my computer and I don't have any G drive, you will get an exception that looks like this that says file not found exception. It'll tell you that it couldn't find this location. Here's an example. Here what we did, the first thing again to review, we import java.io.asterisk. We go to main and we add throws IO exception. Here what I'm doing is I'm asking the user how many pets they have, and I'm reading that count in. And then because it's a number, I'm going to ignore the enter that's after it. And then I tell them enter a file name. They're going to tell me the file that they want to write the pets to. So I ask them for the file name and I read it in. And I'm going to use that file name to create my PrintWriter. So here, this program is going to create a file with the user's preference. It's not hard-coded like I had it in my example. Here, the user is deciding the file name. So the user here, when you ask them to enter the file name, they need to enter the whole string. So if it's on the desktop or on a flash drive, they need to say C:2 double slashes, like whatever. Okay, so the user has to enter the full path. And then because I asked them how many pets, let's say they said 5, I write a loop that runs that number of count, let's say 5. It's going to ask them to enter that pet number, and then it's going to read in that pet number, and now it needs to write it to the file. So it's going to go and write it to the file. And the last thing we need to make sure we do is what? Excellent. We need to close the file. If I don't close the file, then the file does not get saved. So if I come here to my NetBeans and let's create another file, let's call it Java, put a 2.3 there, and I forget to close. Let's see what's going to happen. So it's going to run, it's not going to give you any errors, but if I go back to my desktop and I find that file, Java 123, I find that it's empty. PrintWriter, the line that is doing this, the PrintWriter line created the file. It created the file, but it did not write anything to it. In the next video, I will show you how to prevent deleting the contents of the file and erasing the contents of the file, and instead I'll show you how you can append to an existing file.